Speaker,
the Honourable Annette
Mr.
King.
Speaker, I wish I'd brought my handkerchief down to the House so I could wipe the saliva off my face from the member who was frothing at the mouth as he made that speech. Mr. Speaker, many members of this House realise that it's actually Social Justice Week. It's a week that the Catholic bishops of New Zealand set aside time to highlight how they see New Zealand families faring. And this year they have called the week, "What Does It Take for All Our Families to Flourish?" And they are looking particularly at family poverty. And I have to say that I really do admire the forthright way they go about highlighting the issues without fear or favour on behalf of New Zealanders. And Caritas, their NGO that does most of the work, has a vision of working for a world free of poverty and injustice. So I was very disappointed to hear the Minister of Social Development sneer at Social Justice Week, and it probably sums it up. That is how the National Party treat those who go out there and stand up on behalf of New Zealand. And it made me think about how hard it is for organisations like Caritas to achieve their goals and their visions when they've got a government at best distorts the facts and at worst indulges in malicious fabrications. Because there is one word that cannot be said in this House by that government, and that word is poverty. They won't mention the word. It is the word that cannot be said. It does not exist. They think there are other words you should use. Vulnerable people. Today it was those in hardship. All the ministers said very low income, but never say poverty, because if you say it, then it might exist. It might actually exist in New Zealand. You see, I can see a pattern from this government, and it's a pattern of cover-ups. It is a pattern of covering up the evidence and the information, denying realities. You got it from the Prime Minister today. You got it from many ministers, black as white, even if it's not, as they deny the realities of what's happening in New Zealand. And then they blame everybody else. After going into the 8th year, and they're crowing today that it's 1 year since they became the government. It's 8 years they're in now since they became the government, and it's still everybody else's fault. So they blame the beneficiaries. Well, of course, they crow about how they gave the beneficiaries the first increase in 40 years. Well, for the cabin boy, I'll tell him they were the first government in 40 years to cut the benefit. And Bill English, who crowed about it today, was in that very government. None of us have forgotten the budget of 1991 when they slashed the benefit. So they didn't even restore it to what it was, and this is some great win. So they blame the beneficiaries, and then they blame the protesters. We are a country that's always allowed people to get out there and say what they think. So what do they call protesters? Protesters, they're a renter crowd. Well, of course, the Prime Minister had never protested over anything, because he can't even remember what side he was on during the Springboks tour, so you would never have seen him on a protest. Then they blame the unions. They call the unions our political enemies. Well, it's the unions who got off their chuffs and got out there and fought for health and safety for workers in New Zealand, not this government. They wanted to say that workers working in dangerous workplaces were okay, but if you worked in a worm farm or a butterfly farm, that was very dangerous. It is unions that have stood up for New Zealanders. And then they have to blame everybody else, the lefties, the loonies, anybody else they can put in there. Then they create total new histories. Rewrite entire histories of what's happened in New Zealand. Most of us can't believe it. We're told the economy was left in a very bad state. The very Minister of Finance who said in December 2008 that the previous government had left this country ready for the rainy day that had come. So how come, after 8 years of rewriting history, it was the worst government that had no government debt, that had the lowest unemployment in the OECD, that had left this country in a far better position than it is today? And then we have them, I have to say, the hallmarks of a government you could not trust. You could not trust a government that goes on making up political targets, goes on making up their truth and fooling New Zealanders. Where have we got to, Mr Speaker? Where have we got to in this country?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable
Mr Speaker.